Well, hello everyone. It's 7:30 and we are here a little early this evening with our literary nights with Unsolicited Press. We have two great authors tonight, Cara Waterfall and Kim Ramos, part of the Year of the Woman with Unsolicited Press. But before we begin, I would like to remind everyone to smash the like button and to follow us on either StreamYard or YouTube, wherever you're watching from. So this way, and also hit the bell button so you can have a notice of whenever we will be our next video will be taking place. So welcome to Cara, Waterfall, and Kim. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, one more thing I need to say for housekeeping. If anybody has any questions for either of these authors, if you write them in the comments section from wherever you're watching, we will be able to see them and answer you in real time. So welcome, Cara and Kim. We are looking forward to hearing your work and hearing about your book. So Cara, we usually go in alphabetical order, first name. So welcome and tell us about your book and what you're going to be reading tonight.
Thank you so much, Rosalia. I'm really pleased to be here with you guys tonight. My book is called Radiant Wound, and it's my debut poetry collection. And I started writing these poems in 2016 about my life in Abidjan, which is in Côte d'Ivoire, which is in West Africa. And it was after the conflict, post-election conflict, but basically a civil war in 2010 and 2011. And I had moved there shortly after it had finished. And so it was my first time living there. So the book is mainly about belonging and identity. And also it's a tribute to the everyday resilience of the Ivorians. I'm actually in Abidjan now. It's the third time I'm living here. And I really have like a love affair with this country. So the book is sort of observing, I guess, difficult moments, but also some of the more radiant and luminous aspects of Ivorian culture. So,
sounds really interesting. So we're pleased that you're able to join us all the way from halfway around the world.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just get right into it. I'm going to read the self-portrait as Roundabout Mannequin. So I used to live in this area and I would pass this mannequin that was next to this rubble. And I kind of self-identified with it because I was feeling sort of lost and just really didn't fit in at all here, even though the people are incredibly welcoming. So I will start reading from that now. Self-portrait is Roundabout Mannequin. I am crude in the daylight, a sepulchral figure cloaked in khaki dust, my mouth swilling city grit as dirt pinwheels through the ribs of an iron bed frame. By afternoon, my shadow falls twice as long. At night, vampiric in the moonlight, my jaundiced skin glistens, headlights crisscross each shellacked follicle and the puckered sheen of my brain. Rain dribbles into the crater where my left eye once nested and gutters out. Looted by the elements, sometimes a body fits amid the bric-a-brac, but nowhere else. At rush hour, I parse the landscape, each yellowing shirt and stiff skirt, every motor roaring through my hollowed torso, every rubbernecker, or is there nobody? Am I nobody amid the din? Newness has its own bittersweet pathology. I am made of skin and seam and apprehension. But my heart has heft, still blooms under this ruptured blue, aches in the electric air, stuck in this outdoor pew, a love story could unfold. The sun sets through my absent eye, I glow, radiant as any wound. So the second poem I wanted to read is entitled Maquis, and a maquis is like a street side diner here in Côte d'Ivoire. They're very popular. Ivorians love to party. They love to be out. They're a very, I would say, very convivial group of people. And I wrote this about a woman I saw working in a maquis. The belly of this hard-scrabble street growls under bald acacia trees. Smoke from the cooking fires uncoils from metal roofs riddled with bird shit. In front, the floodlit disarray of rickety chairs and tables sticky with bisap. Bottomless bass of the radio rumbles, static bumbles from the football game. A rooster's scabbed feet dart between plastic tablecloths. An untethered dog yaps, taps its stumpy tail, skinny strings of saliva swinging from jowl to jowl. A woman hovers over the grill, wrists darken with the spatter of palm oil and the gasp of chilies. Her fingernails wrap iron, the air seethes with diesel, raw onion, singed feathers. Her thoughts simmer in dusk's orange silo. The calabash spits, a runny yolk hisses. She jabs an eggplant with a blunt knife. Flies wreathe her nose, mouth, dull pearls of attiéké crumble in a plastic bag. Evening brims with the blather of hungry customers. Blonde globules of ginger beer blister red straws, young throats. Truckers loll, coiffed hogba. She untwines one memory and then another. They brine in the swelter. Kids giggle, trip in and out of the shadows, spindly as seedlings. Night ferments, smear of cloud, scratch of stars. She emerges, serves lukewarm plates, her head wrap unswaddles as she gnashes through the flack of dust and bug, the din candling her nerves. A baby bulges in the small of her back, eyes shuttered against the fat moon. The next poem I'd like, oh, sorry.
I was just,
Oh yeah, the snapping, love it.
yeah.
Love it. The next poem I'm going to read is sort of started off as like an anti-ode and became an actual ode. It's Ode to the Cockroach. There are quite a few here. They're really fast and they fly, and I've never liked them. But I have a begrudging respect for them now. Fairest body, feral heart, you were forged elsewhere, alloy of alien parts, the brassy husk, barbed limbs. Form built for velocity, fiery wings throttle air, compel those swift stems of licorice to feast on stamp glue, peppermint wrappers, bits of lint. At dusk, you declare regency over each room. A blade of light cleaves the gloom momentarily. You are reborn at night, you glow auburn, glower. Those prehistoric eyes prowl this hive, divining the embryonic to the refined. Creature without coda or quota, like dark matter everywhere unseen and everywhere in between. You combat lessening with glut, approve genetics and good luck, bend the world to your bias, and like a virus, always keen to reinvent. If called for, your belly embraces deprivation. Adaptation is your birthright to outlive, outlast. Something encoded in the brain convulses with closure, corrodes restraint, compels you closer to the carnal. Procreate, and you may replicate something of the eternal. Kinetic with intent, you tear into the hereafter, bold beneath the aegis, the armor of grit and sinew. You understand as we do, time is carnivorous. Thank you. I wrote a series of poems about the Abidjan Zoo. So during the conflict, they weren't able to feed the animals in the zoo, and I really became really moved by the plight of the animals and the fact that they weren't able to feed them during this conflict. So I have a couple of epigraphs here. One's from the director of the zoo at the time, who said, when men were fighting over the last baguette of bread in the shops, there was nothing to eat for the animals at the zoo, especially the carnivores who paid a heavy price during this crisis. And then I have a proverb. We do not ask a man who is hungry if his dog has eaten. So I'm just going to read a few poems I wrote about the animals at the zoo. Lion's Lament for Leia, Simba, and Lulu. We were stabled in a scorched mosaic of smoke and fire, while another story blazed beyond the gates. Gone the splendor of our manes, mangy and matted, laurels of sorrow slanting over irises cloudy with want. Gone golden musculature, now disheveled sacks, the fretwork of bone shredding flesh. We sank to our haunches, limbs crackling beneath us like kindling, too weak to whittle down the bars with our jaws. We hallucinated antelopes ripening at sunset, scarlet racks of meat, glinting pools of water. Oh, how we envied the spider drifting between bars, toward the greening spires of the forest, toward the high nucleus of midday sun, unseen from where we sat in the stench of our own unbecoming. Hunger tames, but starvation slays. To live beyond our bodies, to wither, to wane. This is what betrayal tastes like, tawny grit of dust, gunpowder, torch tires searing our throats. Near the end, we fed on the diminishing dark and the syllables of birds. In this citadel, we would never leave. A tire hung from a rope, a garret, a gaping mouth, and beyond that sightless eye, we saw the zoo wardens as good as hogtied, the need for forgiveness pressed like a blade against their throats. Thank you. Another poem in this series is entitled Elephant Memory, and it's for the only forest elephant that was at the zoo. In the absence of food, feed on memory, feet sinking into the silken peat of the waterhole, hush of mud-seamed faces, plump tongues glued to the mineral lick, elliptical ears flapping like fronds. In the absence of space, forage for that fragment of wildwood unfolding slow as October's sun, its knotted tendons of liana and acacia sinewed and silvering. Unyoke yourself from this loneliness, whose spectral body flattens you like the harmattan. Feast on the veined earth in all its communion, from its termite skeins to the deer's honeyed limbs, from every smoking copse to the osprey's blonde oculus. Imbibe the dream body of your father and the mildewed soul of your mother. Find refuge there, or perish. The next poem I wanted to read was inspired by a photography project by a visual artist and photographer named Joanna Chumali. She did a project on female charcoal makers here in San Pedro. So her work was called Sissy Barra's Smoke Work, and my poem is called Sissy Barra, The Way of Smoke. In the morning, you are white as mercy, brown as a bittern's wing, gray as goat's breath after rain. In the dusk, you are crimson as a coxcomb, blue as a whetstone, black as a shovel at day's end. You knuckle me like a right hook, each eye a lozenge, weeping ash. You scissor my appetite. My heart is a shard, getting darker and darker. I was born in the Bardo dust, not far from the barking sea. I played in sawdust squalls and on scabbed logs crisscrossing the sewage. When I was 8, my mother took me to the sawmill dump. The men sat in the warehouse while we picked through the dregs, trash wood, tree barks, coconut shells. We hitched a ride home and rigged the charcoal oven. A whip of smoke curled like an agouti's tail. The fire bucked, a darkling mare, its mane a hammerfall of flames. The oven bawled, its tears blessing the bluing wood. A day later, its slow and beaten scent smoldered to prayer. Together we broke the oven open and collected its ebony trinkets with grateful palms. Ashes hail of frail parchment. I shoved through smoke's first lather, the field shrieking its stench. Charcoal stubs poke through dunes like blunt snouts. I skitter across cinders, the heat of a lit wick hitting me again and again. Sweat caramelizes my neck, a cough corkscrews my chest, my lungs sardined of air. The rain welts my body as my mother watches from the eaves. At night, I sink like an anvil into the mud. A colony of bones unfurls, your clawed hands brushing my ribs, but I keep working because all my potential lives within your darkness. Charcoal is a crop like any other. I stockpile patience. I work for a pittance, my tithe measured in the drenched hours in San Pedro starlight. I gather you in my arms, skin stippled white, sprigs of hair still damp. I clean your body with seawater, chant psalms into the seashell curl of your ear, bury you under the banana tree. I offer fresh water, cola nuts, millet flour, and saliva so you may ascend to your ancestors. My half-winged daughter, I invoke the smoke to accompany you. How do I dispel the night's viscera? By naming the invisible. Her name was Lolo, star. We billow in the oven's afterglow and that breach between darkness and deed. Our shadows, supple as spiders, swim through the air. As we breathe, we are eaten by smoke, a slow cleaving of soul from body, so we may vanish one day into a light taller than trees. Widowed by smoke, we must find our own way. We sew wings of ash upon our backs. Do I have time for one more poem? Sure? Okay. I'll read an excerpt from a poem entitled Linguistics. So my grandmother was French, my partner is French, my children all I have 3 children. They all grew up speaking French, and English is my first language, but I've always sort of been in the French language. And this poem, Linguistics, is basically about me, I guess, just not knowing how to communicate at the beginning and then finding a sort of facility with the language later on. Linguistics. 1. Out slips sideways the jabber of translation, threadbare. Sounds rumble through the tunnel of my mouth and give up like a raven stuck in a drain pipe. I do not want to untell my story, but in this impossible drought, tongue fattens and declares mutiny upon itself. Inside a silence rides this open space and sticks, binding my cry like a burr. Shall I quarry this cavity? In that murky cumulus of leaving, even my gestures grimace and smirk, rooted in the gorge of unknowing. 2. Where my elocution was confused, nigh distinguish a clearing. Mind hopscotches to and fro, consonants knocking against each other like dropped bricks. Mirror words, but they come out wild, widening and unwinding like a faulty parachute. Circle the arena of conversation and glitch. Size up my interlocutor. Roll each word, stillborn, marbling its rightness. Then soldier on, sirening its slang into being, plucking utterances out of this thrift shop, this linguistic swap and blend, spun through the snare of invention. Relax inside this bracken of sound, braid devotion into each phrase, for there is love in error. How to create a nest out of this poverty of language, a map of sounds that is hungry to expand its geography. 3. Relief like a stone weight drops and dissipates like rings into a well. We have hammered out a dialect from this faltering, orient away from reticence and toward outpour. Brushed awake, the furrowed mind turns over surfaces new and old and fuses them together, sip the sweetness of the spoken world. 4. Welcome to the voluble present where rigor has been muscled out of the guttural. We learn persuasion, debate, give ourselves over to oration. My tongue is a cleverness of red. When called, I steer words like a snake from its nest, all liquid ease, speech greening for me in ribbons and radiating beyond, gaining strength and meaning. No longer thirsty for a system, double whole notes ladder up the canals of sound. How does fluency taste? It's arriving. 5. Underneath, we are each of us, raw with color, like a tilled field. Each cluster of stones articulates a path which mothers us toward meaning. Still, I will never unremember those early days when I wondered, who needs words? When I looked at each foreign road, graveled or blacktopped or dusty, and thought, its muteness is real to me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Such powerful poetry, and I cannot wait for the Q&A. And now we're going to be hearing Kim telling us about her book and reading from her work. Welcome, Kim, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rosalia. I'll be reading from The Beginner's Guide to Minor Gods and Other Small Spirits, which came out with Unsolicited Press in 2023 as my debut chapbook. So really honored to get to revisit it now, and very happy to have Unsolicited Press as, the first place to pick up a book. This began as my senior thesis in undergrad, thinking about the ways that poetry, art, and science are interconnected, and how these are all kind of a search for meaning and for order in the world. I think religion too and science are both kind of trying to find ways to order things and to create, like a story or a narrative with which, to find ourselves. So I'll start with Consider the Salmon. The salmon leaves the ocean for the place upstream where it came into being. This is called chemical memory. This is baked in the bones. All this to die shortly after spawning. So consider. I throw myself up waterfalls without fully knowing why, scales spitting light like prisms, the whole body arced and airborne. I'm pulled to places I dream remember, swept up in mouths that feel familiar. When the salmon dies, it's a form of politeness, making room for more mouths, more decay, a rock growing ever smoother beneath burgeoning tides, with nothing to hold on to. I want to obliterate every egg before it can lust after fresh water. To break a circle, you must eat it. Monstrous but necessary. But imagine all the beauty I lose in loving nothing. Rainbowed scales, thick and fast in a moving river, the cold gasp of my body against a current, closer and closer to that first love. Okay, thanks. We'll jump to, this is Essay as an Aporia after Sumita Chakraborty's essay on joy. A star is brightest when viewed from the corner of the eye. To see a god swimming in his indulgence, one must not look directly at him, but somewhere off to the side. It's something about the design of the retina, that silvery nebula stuffed in the back of the socket. An eye, when dissected, yields many parts, all of which fit in a fist. Heidegger writes, "We are too late for the gods and too early for being. All light is old when it reaches the eye. All images that reach the eye have already dissolved. I put my hand in the light, but the light has moved on. If light had eyes, it would see everything instantaneously. It would jump from the sun to my palm. This is true. This is physics. The gods are gone, but maybe a holy bone still explodes in my eyes. Maybe a bit of God's light still tumbles down the side of the mountain. A boy once told me lightning was inefficient in the way it cut and curled and arced. If he had designed lightning, it would hit the trees and roofs in a straight vertical line. This, he said, is good design. The light through the window laughed at his empty hands. Heidegger writes, to head toward a star, this only. At night I sit in the grass and wish for gravity to dissolve and hurl me from Earth's breast. I want to touch young light and hold a photon in my fist. I want to see a star swimming in its gods, a knife of lightning lodged in my eye. The gods are physics, but maybe a boy still yields many parts. I am too early for forgetting and too late for looking. I am instantaneously inefficient. My path is not straight, but a jagged arm holding the sky. A star is brightest when viewed from the corner of the eye. Thanks. I wrote many of these poems when I was living in rural Missouri, which is also where I grew up. So a lot of these are also about the natural flora and fauna of Missouri and also the experience of growing up there as an Asian American person. So this is folklore for Missouri boys. Cut away the skin, bone, fat of some dolphins washed ashore, and you'll find a boy nestled in the slick gray body. Uncurling from sleep, his eyes are as dark as a deep sea vent. We dress the boys in shirts and pants and tell them how lucky they are to have legs. We'd send them into landlocked fields of grass with hatchets and knives. These boys, they only laugh when it rains. These boys, they crouch low to watch tadpoles at the creek, a sad hunger. These boys, they long for salt and brine. They fill their heads with water, and then they stumble home. These boys, they kiss whoever's closest. A body to rise against them like a tide, its breath, its fickleness, and finally, after a storm, stillness. These boys, they get married, and on weekends they go fishing. They bait their hooks with skin and nails like the water might remember them, like every sewer might be a way back to the ocean. Thanks. Okay, I'll move to this one, which is 8 Ways of Looking at the Moon. 1. Some think the moon was born out of a geological kiss between two mothers, a clashing of lips. Others think it built itself alongside the earth, like a younger sister mimicking an older sibling. Or maybe it took one look at the earth and decided to elope. 2. Lake of softness settled near my soles and marsh of sleep between my brows. Bay of love and bay of roughness, one in each hand. Lake of dreams along my 6th rib. Sea of serenity overlapping with sea of crises. 3. The moon loves best at a distance. 4. Hit me hard enough and I'll turn to volcanic glass, the impact shattering my kneecaps. All my old bruises turn orange, and upon discovery, the Apollo 17 astronauts could not believe the color. 5. The moon is called a celestial body even though it is pockmarked with scars, covered in craters. It is loved when it is a sleep-heavy sliver and when it is a glistening eye. Its ivory fingers reach into the water and pull in the tides. 6. The moon is drawn to things larger than itself, and it does not resent this desire. 7. The moon is home to droves of silken rabbits. The moon is a hologram hanging in the sky, projected from deep beneath the earth. The moon is a loving goddess. The moon is a small white pill of lunacy. The moon hears girls singing and loves the slow curls of shower steam rising. 8. I siphon off light from other bodies. I don't have enough of it in me. I was not born bioluminescent. My dullness is inherent, but when I touch light, I make it soft, silver, silent. And in the perfect dusk, I paint the leaves. Okay, I'm going to read one poem, not from this collection, but I think that fits thematically, which is The Girls of the Midwest, which is after Katie Schmidt's poem, The Boys of the Midwest. The girls of the Midwest have mothers who never speak of pleasure. Their fathers speak of it, but only as a warning. The girls hold their bodies like loaded rifles, shouldered and bulky, fingering the trigger. They hold their bodies like breath, eyes shut, the water teasing at their nostrils like a coming threat. The boys at school play pleasure like a guitar riff. The boys leave the locker room flushed and fresh, their wet hair curled and smiling on their necks. The girls hold their bodies like batons, paraded, tossed, a near fumble, then caught. They hold their bodies like firecrackers, a dare that lasts until their hands get hot. There is a pleasure-sized hole in the health textbook. The girls imagine around the absence. They hold their bodies like steering wheels, at 10 and 2, a hip and a hip, a shoulder and a shoulder. They hold their bodies like frogs on dissection day, splayed and waiting. In the bathroom at the dance, the girls lean forward into dirty mirrors, pushing pleasure up and out of their necklines. They hold their bodies like movie tickets, a means of entry, rom-com, blockbuster, horror flick hungry. They hold their bodies like beer cans, slick and cold, crushed when empty. Pleasure nips at the girls' heels each time they walk into the woods. They hold their bodies like tree limbs, a foothold to some higher place. They hold their bodies like blunts, close to a flame, then passed from hand to hand. The riot of cicadas and their endless crooning is pleasure to their ears. The girls pray that one day they might join that chorus. They hold their bodies like firewood, to be gathered, cut, and burned. They hold their bodies like flint, struck, scraped, summoning fire. Pleasure gnaws away at the tinder. The girls of the Midwest have bodies that hold light like candles, their hair frayed and skywards like a wick. All night, pleasure roasts tender on a spit. And I'll finish up with one more. We wake up and go looking. We wake up and go looking for cathedral ceilings underneath benches and coffee cups in the nearest mouth, moving the tongue aside to find empty tabernacles, a singular fly drowsing out. We imagine falling upwards until we burn, reverse meteorites, pulled by our throat cords into the sky. We wake up and we're forgetting something important, the name of the lake we visited once with someone we loved. We're afraid we'll wander for 40 years and still not have our helping of milk and honey. We want to take our time studying someone's face, but they turn away so quickly. Next stop, next aisle, next person. We must be looking for something to invest in. A nest in a rib cage, a hole in the ground, a stomach in the hands of a man in the sky. Burning down, falling up, We grab at what we can, whether it's clouds or hands or pieces of scrap metal. We're not sure what we're searching for, but we feel closer to it when we take a stranger's hand, show him the way to the well. The earth just barely holds our heels. Thank you.
Thank you both for reading such excellent poetry and inspiring. So now is the time for our Q&A, and I want to ask you both, how, what inspired you to, like, Cara talked a little bit about living in, is it Azerbaijan, or is that how you say it?
It's Abidjan. Yeah, it's Ivory Coast, basically.
Abidjan.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and Kim and Missouri. So place plays a really key role in both of your poetry. So wondering how it came to that, and can you talk a little bit about how place inspired a lot of the poetry, and once again go in alphabetical order.
Yeah, actually, the first time I lived in Abidjan, I received a grant to write 2 long-form features. And I chose to write about Ivorian women fighting for change and art as reconciliation. And so I had 6 months to develop these articles, which meant that I was doing a lot of interviewing, and I was on the ground a lot, engaging with people in the community. And so when I completed those articles, there were so many stories there that didn't naturally fit into the articles, but seemed like great fodder for poetry. And also, it's a very vibrant and colorful culture. And obviously, as someone who's an outsider, everything was new to me. So it's a different form of paying attention. Like, poetry is all about paying attention, but I think when you're new to a place, everything seems incredible, right? And worthy of being written about. So that was the genesis for my poems.
And Kim, how does place feature in your inspiration for your work?
Yeah, I like that Cara mentioned that poetry is an act of attention, and that being in a new place really primes you for that. Um, Growing up in Missouri, a lot of the, natural scenery felt very old to me for a very long time. I wanted to, get out, move to a different state, but I ended up going to college in Missouri, 4 hours north from the town I grew up in, and I think there's something in that period of time where everything does feel new again, even if it feels very familiar. And oftentimes the Midwest is called, flyover country, something that, not worth seeing, all just cornfields. But there's a lot of variety there. And I became very grateful that I got that extra time to live there and to really take in everything it has to offer. Like, there are these super clear blue springs about half an hour from where I grew up that you wouldn't know about. Um, and ever since I've moved too, I think I've felt more fondly about Missouri, and I always look forward to going back in the summer when everything is very lush. And of course, poets always are trying to find lessons or stories in nature, so it felt very
Hmm.
natural.
Well, both of your poetry is extremely beautiful and inspiring. So, Cara, talk a little bit about the zoo. Were you there when these animals were starving, or was that an after effect of your being there? Like, how did you find out about the zoo?
Yeah, I had actually read some articles about it. I had been doing some research. I mean, I did a lot of research for those articles. And I just came across this article about the zoo, and I was really struck by it. And I have another poem where I write about this crocodile feeder in another city who actually ended up eaten by one of the crocodiles that he fed for 4 decades. And so really it's like these stories that kind of grab your attention. And I wanted to, I guess, like bring attention to people that don't often have a voice. And I tried very hard to emphasize how, I'm very much an outsider, and I didn't want to appropriate anyone else's experiences. At the same time, I did want to share a lot of the things that I was seeing, that how strong people were being after this conflict, all the different aspects that might not have been covered in regular news. So yeah.
What really struck me about that poem was the suffering of the animals based on the behavior of the people. You know,
Mm,
the wild animals were taken out of their habitat so that people can gawk at them and gaze at them. But when the people
yeah,
couldn't get along, the animals suffered even more. So I'm an animal lover. So that's what really struck me about how when we war upon each other, we have no idea of how nature around us, whether it's animals in the zoo or, you know, like there was a big story in the Post today about the dogs in Ukraine.
mm,
You know, it's like they're the invisible army and they actually reflect human suffering. And so you captured that very well
thank you.
in your poem.
The
And
poems are
Kim,
pretty.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, no, I was saying the poems are pretty bleak. They're not very upbeat. Um, but it was a very strange time after the conflict. So I think, that's captured in the poems as well.
Yeah, and that's what happens after conflict. I mean, we're living in a world of conflict today. Um, you know, and everyone suffers, whether no matter where the conflict is, we all suffer if you're empathetic and compassionate. And which poets I think are, you know, natural empaths. So, Kim, I'm intrigued by your poem about the boys and the girls. The boys, you know, being related to dolphins, and the girls kind of holding themselves rigid and tough like weapons. So, the one with the boys really struck me. They fill their heads with water, and it seems so very true that they came from, you know, that they were from dolphins. So, can you talk about that a little bit? Because I'm not familiar with the flyover Missouri. So, are there large bodies of water there in which that image would come to you?
No, it's a landlocked state. There's not very large bodies of water. But my father, lived for a time in the Philippines. He had moved here when he was 1, but for a while they lived in the Philippines again. Um, and so I think, the Philippines is, a series of islands. Uh, he sometimes felt very out of place in his adolescence when he moved to Missouri. Um, and partly because I think he really missed some of the scenery of the Philippines, or for a while he grew up in New Mexico deserts, um, and so there's this very tangible feeling of being out of place, kind of playing on the fish out of water sort of saying. Um, but the ocean and kind of the symbolism of like seafood, fish is very important to my family. We have some kind of like silly folklore stories. Like my grandmother says, if she dreams of the ocean, she knows someone near her is pregnant, and she's been right every single time. So the way that those sorts of like little stories like feed into your sense of self and your sense of place, it's very interesting to me. I don't get into it a ton in this chapbook, but in this other chapbook, Alive Today Again, that's more of a theme. And I like to think that those two chapbooks as kind of sisters because they're both
Mhm.
about place. They maybe highlight different themes, but some of them are, the undertones are the same.
Well, it seemed very clear. I mean, it seems so truthful that I mean the poem, the metaphor works in a way that it seems just so true, and the way you weave the metaphor around it, you know, they fill their head with liquid, and boys really do that. You know, they really do. As a mother of a son, just so I really appreciate it. And talk a little bit about the poem about the women, the girls.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I am a philosophy graduate student here at Brown, Missouri, Brown University now. And I TA'd for a feminist philosophy course. And one of the big themes of that course was the way that language is used to both liberate and to oppress. Sometimes lacking language to talk about your experience is its own specific oppressive experience.
Mhm.
Um, And so a lot of the time we're reading a lot of not just philosophy papers, but also, papers from social science, people who are doing sort of like interview-based research. And a lot of the time, women, when they're asked about, like what pleasure is to them or what they like, they kind of lack the linguistic ability to do that just because they've not seen a lot of examples of that. And two, we see that kind of in the way sex ed occurs in schools. It's very much, abstinence based. Um, Pleasure is not part of that story, certainly not for the girls. And so I started thinking about, the problem of sexual liberation, not as one of shame, but one of absence, and that we don't really know how to talk about that. And at the time, I was reading Katie Schmidt's book, Nowhere, where she talks about the boys of the Midwest. And it's a very kind of like magical, realist sort of story where like the boys hunt in packs and like they live under rugs. So it was really great to be kind of reading those two things at the same time because they collided really well.
Well, Cara talks about language too in one of her poems about learning how to use language or to use voice. So can you sort of talk about that? Because I think that Kim hit upon something. Women don't have women's language is inhibited and limited just the way their bodies are limited, especially these days with the war on women. At least in the U.S., I don't know what it's like in Abidjan. So, Cara, can you talk about that? I mean, it intrigues me that you heard French all around you, but your mother tongue is English. So, were you trying to communicate in French and English, or like talk a little bit about that?
I mean, I think I've always been like a bit of an outsider because my father worked in the foreign service. We moved around a lot. And and I just naturally kind of, my mother is Malaysian, but she was adopted by a French grandmother and an English, French mother and English father. And so she is, ethnically Malaysian, but she's very, very English, and French was part of her upbringing as well. She grew up in northern France. And so, and she actually lives in France now. And it's this weird thread throughout my life where French just keeps on popping up. Like even the partner I chose is from France. And we keep on coming back to these French speaking countries. But the thing with any language, unless you're really good at it, is that people always know it's not your first language or you're not from here. And also there are obviously the visual cues, right? And the cultural cues that you need to learn when you move to a different country. And so all of that was part of the learning curve for me. And French is sort of like, I mean, like English and Spanish, many people speak it, but depending on the country you're in, the dialect is different, and also the cultural cues, the cultural references. And so that was like a real learning curve for me at the beginning. And also, it was just a strange time to be in Abidjan because there was just a lot of, tension, obviously, in the air. And it was only when I came back here, and I think it was like 2016, and I had my two boys with me at that time, that I saw the country the way I think it was supposed to be, like where it was sort of revitalized after the conflict. But I mean, my children correct my French every day. There's like enormous possibilities for, embarrassing yourself or making mistakes. But I think, um, there's a lot that can be learned just by trying, right? Like I think people always appreciate when you're trying to communicate in their language, And there are 60 dialects in this country. So French, I mean, it's a colonial leftover, post-colonial leftover language, but most people speak it here. So
Well, every language has its like even in the U.S., people speak English with a different accent. You can always tell what city they're from, and I didn't realize that that happened in other countries. My father was born in Palermo, and when I on his last trip and my first to Italy, I was a little shocked to find out that everyone knew exactly what city my father came from, despite having lived in the U.S. for a long time, because they recognized his accent. As soon as he opened his mouth, they said, "Oh, a Palermitan," and we were not in anywhere near Sicily. They knew immediately where he was from. So I could not hear that because I didn't speak Italian well enough to place his use of language in from a different city, but certainly being in the US, I can certainly figure out a southern accent from a New England accent, from a New, everybody knows and makes fun of the New York accent or the Boston accent. So let's talk a little bit about nature. Both of you have poems that really focus on nature a lot. In addition to the animal piece, to the zoo piece, which was very bleak, there's also the dog that in the poem about the woman in the eatery, or the what is it called, the so let's talk
Maki.
about, yeah, so let's talk about nature, because in nature is, it seems in both of your poems, nature is not outside human life, but just a part of life, and your characters are part of nature. I especially love the moon poem, which is nature. So talk a little bit about how the use of nature informs your work, and in alphabetical order again.
Um, I guess like for me, it's just having done all that research for those long form articles. I was able to go to different. Here, the neighborhoods are called communes, and Abidjan is like quite a big city, and so like the further you kind of get out from like the urban center, you're experiencing more of nature. But the truth is, like, because it's a third world country, there's a real agricultural aspect to even the cities that is evident in just the way people conduct their daily lives. And so there's just so much integration of nature with, I mean, just this morning, like we were late to school because there were a bunch of goats that are being used for this Muslim festival that's happening next week, Tabaski. Um, and they block the route, and that can happen at any time. You know, there's always some sort of nature. There's a lot of beauty here as well, in the animals that we see. And Abidjan is on a lagoon, so there's a lot of wildlife around there. I mean, there's a lot of garbage as well, and like it's not the cleanest city all the time, but it just seems to be seamlessly interwoven with the way people conduct their lives here.
That comes through in your poetry. It really does. And Kim, talk about. I love how you sort of marry nature and science, which seems normal because science and nature are one. So talk a little bit about how you came to that. You're a philosophy major now, but what was your undergrad? Were you a physics or something? Because you seem to have gotten science point down really well.
Thank you. I for a time I wanted to go into medicine, and so growing up as a kid, I really liked reading about biology. You know, learning about how cells work, differences between different types of cells, and there's maybe a narrative there where, you know, the more you learn about something scientifically, the less mysterious and compelling it becomes, or the less divine, because now, you know, we know how it really works. But it seems like, you know, the more you get into these topics, the more mysteries pop up. Like, you know, why is it that this specific protein is like here in the chromosomes, and like um, it's something about that protein, you know, denaturing or coming apart, that's what leads to cellular death in some instances. So the more you learn, the more, you know, mysteries pop up. It's a very kind of a like a argument from design sort of existence for God that Thomas Aquinas talked about. Um, so there's definitely that level of complexity. But I do philosophy now. Um, but it does seem like yeah, this desire to order the natural worlds and to find one's place within it is something that undergirds like almost every discipline. And so I think it's really nice to see how that sort of search for meaning can allow different disciplines to speak to one another. Um, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Well, your metaphors are very beautiful, especially. Uh, I really appreciated it in the moon poem, being as you come up, you're sitting in the chair and you sort of like channel some of the metaphors that come while you're in the zone. So let's, in the last few minutes, let's talk about the writing process. How do you each approach the writing process? Do you write every day? Do you keep journals? So, so let's talk about the writing of, the business of the writing. How disciplined are you? That kind of thing. So once again, alphabetical by first name.
I'm actually not that disciplined, and I took a huge break. I used to write a lot of poetry when I was younger, and my father really inspired me to write a lot of poetry. He was my mentor. And then, I guess in my 20s and 30s, I was just working, and I kind of fell out of writing poetry. And then when I ended up moving, I lived in Cote d'Ivoire, and then I moved to London, England, and I ended up taking a diploma in poetry and lyric discourse. And I had to wake up twice a week at 2:30 in the morning and do 2-hour workshops. And I mean, I wasn't sleeping anyway because at the time I was pregnant with my third child, but I was so motivated to do it. And I think like motivation is key, but I also think that if you don't feel like writing, that's okay as well. Like I like to write fragments of things that I find inspiring in a notebook, but I don't try and force things because I feel like if your brain needs a break, that's okay. Sometimes it's better just to be reading or doing other things, sometimes like a poem's just not working and I don't like to force it. And also I'm really working in the pockets of time I have around my kids' homework and their schedules and everything. So it's not really possible to have it as like a daily thing. I wish it was, but it's not for me at this point anyway in my life.
And Kim?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Cara, because I remember I was just thinking like, oh my goodness, I have to admit now that I am not that disciplined. Um, but it does seem like something that you see this a lot with how people do philosophy. You'll like run up against a problem, and you just can't make any leave or headway with it. And so the best thing you can do is just leave it aside, work on something else, read something else. I think poetry is a lot the same way. Like Cara said, it doesn't make sense to force it, but you're still doing things that are maybe getting you closer to the next poem by like going through life, paying attention, reading lots of other poetry, or sometimes not even poetry, other types of literature or nonfiction, which is really helpful. Yeah, I have had less time now that I've started the PhD. I thought, the poetry part of my brain, the philosophy part of my brain were different. So, at the end of the day, I would have energy to do that, but they're the same part. But during breaks, I try to get back into it. I have some friends I workshop with, and we challenge each other to write a poem a day. So even if they're not good, maybe you end up with like 2 or 3 at the end of the month that you want to keep on workshopping further. And that's very helpful.
Yeah. So, some some aspiring writers watch these streamed readings. So, what advice do you have for? I mean, here you are. Even though you're saying you're not disciplined, you're disciplined enough to have produced the book or two. So, what do you want to? What advice would you give to an aspiring writer who wants to be where you're now with a book or two published? So, what advice would you give um, that those writers who are looking at you with longing?
It's interesting because I just taught a middle school workshop last week on my based on my book, and I used mostly the animal poems, and they were very engaged. And I think the most, I mean, I think people have this idea about poetry that it's not, to me, it's music, like honestly, and people love music. I don't understand why they don't love poetry. I see the same like melody and rhythm in poetry. But I would just encourage people to write because they love to and to try different poetic forms. Like I'm sort of a latecomer to trying poetic forms, and I only started to try those I guess later on in life, and I feel like it makes you bend language in a way that is really interesting, and that's what poetry is about. And so I just encourage people to write and also obviously read widely. I mean, I was really impressed with these sixth graders because they got up and read some of their poems, and that's something that I've only recently sort of gotten semi-comfortable with. So there are lots of great aspiring poets out there for sure.
Well, I hope reading your poetry tonight wasn't as difficult. Yeah. And Kim,
Yeah, I think Kara's very right. Reading widely, um, being, excited, passionate about it. Um, I think definitely form is a great way to like just experimenting a lot with your voice, with form. I know a lot of people might find form restrictive, but it's really, I think it challenges you to think outside the box in order to like do things that are linguistically novel within the confines of that form. So that's very helpful. But also having people around you who also care very deeply about their craft or are excited about you writing things and like want to support you. I think that's very helpful. I felt most inspired to work on things when I have people around me who are like really killing it and really putting all of their energy into their creative work. So finding that sort of community is really important.
yes, we must all find our tribe. That's for sure. And also, as Cara mentioned, still taking classes. Despite having books published, I still take classes only because of the inspiration that you get from being with like-minded people around. So that's it for our show today. We're a little bit early. I want to let everyone know that our next Literary Nights with Unsolicited Press is going to be June 11th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time and 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time. I want to thank you, ladies, for joining us from your time zones. What time is it where you are, Cara?
It's yeah, just after midnight.
Oh my gosh! Thank you so much, and we appreciate you
Hey,
joining.
I'm early. Yeah,
Say
but
that
it was
Thank
again.
a
you
I'm
delight.
both.
sorry.
Thank you
Yes.
for them beautiful poems, and thank you so much, Rosalia. It's been awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
thank
We
you
only
to
stay up
both
late.
of you.
I'm inspired by both of you.
Oh, thank you.
Your images were just wonderful. Your metaphor was just wonderful, and I could see why Unsolicited Press snapped up your work
Oh,
because it just sings arias, to borrow a
thank
metaphor
you.
from opera, another art form. So anyway, anybody who is joining us, thank you for joining us. Please come back on June 11th when we have two more writers talking about two more authors from Unsolicited Press talking about their work. And so we say goodnight to you all. Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you.